Years ago, the Venerable Fulton Sheen told a story of a nun who was caring for a horribly ill patient. The patient's leprosy was so severe, so advanced, it was almost putrefying. The rotting skin, the smell of decaying flesh. Yet that nun attended to the patient with remarkable gentleness and care, making sure that the patient was well bathed and cared for, as if she didn't even notice, out of her love for that patient, what the patient was suffering. And a visitor to the hospital stood there and watched for a few moments, and when the nun had finished doing her duties, the visitor went over to the nun and said to the nun with kind of a grimace face and out of disgust, "Sister, I wouldn't do that even if I was given $1 million. The nun smiled and said, "And neither would I." True love for our neighbor. True love for our neighbor, it can't be based on how much we like our neighbor, nor can it be based on how much we get from our neighbor. Why? Because true love, if it's only motivated by those two things, it will never last. True love for our neighbor can only come from a true love for God, in whose image our neighbor has been created in. You see, in the time of Jesus, most people thought that there was one commandment. And that one commandment that they adhered to was to love God first. To them, that was the most important thing. But when Jesus came to this earth, he said, no, there are two commandments. Loving God and also loving your neighbor. Because apart from the two, neither one of those can exist. In our day, however, things are a little bit different. We've kind of set God aside, but yet we show great respect for our neighbor. We show the importance of loving our neighbor, of toleration, of diversity, random acts of kindness, paying things forward. It's kind of those things that we can sink our teeth into. But if we don't love God, can we really carry it out to its fullness? Can we really carry it out to what it really means? In other words, if we don't love God in whose image our neighbor is created, how long and how deeply can we really, truly love our neighbor? Loving God and loving neighbor are the great commandments. And they together, combined together, are the true path to happiness, to the fullness of life. All of us here, we wouldn't be here if we didn't love God. We wouldn't be here if we didn't love our neighbor. But unfortunately, our love is still immature. It has room to grow. It can become stronger. It can become deeper. And as it gets stronger, so will those gifts and fruits of the Holy Spirit at work in our own souls. And that's what we're all hoping for. So what can we do to strengthen our love of God and to make it grow? Like all virtues, we have to begin to exercise them. Maybe this week it's time we go to the spiritual gym. A lot of us like to go to the gym to lift those weights and get a little bit stronger physically. Maybe it's time this week we go to the spiritual gym. It might sound a little bit crazy, but traditionally the church has given us ways to do this. It's called the works of mercy. We can begin by doing those corporal works of mercy. feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, clothing the naked, visiting the sick and imprisoned, sheltering the homeless, burying the dead. And how about those spiritual works of mercy? Maybe we've forgotten what they are. Instructing the ignorant, counseling the doubtful, admonishing the sinners, bearing wrongs patiently in our life, forgiving offenses willingly, comforting the afflicted, praying for the living and the dead. This whole next month, the month of November, the Church gives us as an opportunity to remember all of our deceased relatives and friends, to pray for them. If they're in purgatory, to pray for their souls to help to get them into heaven. And this list that I just gave you, it's not an exhaustive list. There are many, many other things we can do. But maybe this next week we just pick one or two of these things and we begin to work on them. Focus on one or two of them the next week. Don't let a day go by without consciously and intentionally exercising your love for God and also your love for neighbor. Because if we exercise it, it will grow. And when love grows, so does everything else good begin to grow. We can't do one without the other. Let's not forget those two great commandments, for in them, following them, we will truly know the fullness of happiness in our lives.